Matthew chapter 6, we are journeying through the Sermon on the Mount. And if you haven't gotten to join us thus far, you are missing out, because when we look at the words of Jesus in this first inaugural sermon, they are so profound. And I don't know about you, but I have been richly blessed just studying and preparing each message from this sermon. And you know what? We finished Matthew 5 last week. So now we're on Matthew chapter 6. Matthew 5, 6, and 7 are Jesus' first sermon. And we're calling it the Inauguration of the Kingdom, in which he tells us about the kingdom of God and the power and all that is different in this kingdom from what we are used to here in this world. And I'm excited about this morning's message because, again, Jesus challenges us. Like every worship service, when we come to the Word, and we look at the teachings of Jesus, every time it's a little counterintuitive. It's a little, wait, what? What are you saying? How would I do that? What does this mean? And so we have to wrestle with it. And I think that's exactly what a good teacher wants you to do, to wrestle with it. And so we're going to wrestle this morning in Matthew 6. And the first section here, if your Bible is divided into sections like mine, is entitled Giving to the Needy. So let's see what Jesus has to say about that. In verse 1, he says, "Be careful to not do your acts of righteousness before men to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then the Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." All right. So Jesus is challenging us. Now, I don't know the last time that you, quote, gave to the needy, but I'm pretty sure you didn't play any trumpets. So you might be thinking, awesome, check, I've done it. No trumpets when I give to the needy, so I'm good. Thank you, Pastor. Feeling better about myself this morning. We can move on. But what's interesting is Jesus doesn't stop with this. Let's keep going. The next section, prayer. "And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full." Is this sounding familiar? "But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." So here we have a very similar format, very similar words, but this time he's not talking about giving to the needy, he's talking about what? Prayer. Okay, that's interesting. So let's think this through. When I give to someone, I'm helping someone, doing some charitable work. Let's do that in secret. When I'm praying, let's do that in secret. All right, Jesus, a little interesting, a little strange, but I think I get you. Is there anything else? Well, glad you asked. Skip down to verse 16. By the way, we're skipping over the Lord's Prayer, not because we're not going to study it. That's our sermon for next week. So I'll put in a promo. Be with us next week. We are going to look at the Lord's Prayer in a sermon entitled The Perfect Prayer. What would Jesus pray? And here it is. So you're not going to want to miss that next week. But we're going to skip over that for now because in verse 16, we have this same formula again. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, as they disfigure their faces to show men that they are fasting. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head, wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to men that you are fasting, but only to your Father, who sees what is unseen. And your Father, who sees what you have done in secret will reward you. So there's the three: giving to the needy, praying, and fasting. All three of these, Jesus says the same thing. If you're going to do them, do not do them in order to be seen by men, but instead do it in secret, because your Father in heaven, even in the prayer one, he says, your Father who is unseen will see what you did in that unseen world, in that secret place, and you will be rewarded. And I like this one here with the fasting, because he says, when you're fasting, don't go around and disfigure your face and make it look really hard so people will ask, oh, brother so-and-so, what's wrong? I'm fasting. I haven't had anything to eat for 2 days because I'm praying to the Lord. I am fasting to my God. And I've been in churches where I do think there is some pride in people sacrificing and letting others know how hard it is to work for the Lord. I've been in some churches where I wondered if everybody who was baptized in that church was baptized in lemon juice, because their faces looked so sour and they looked so just unhappy being a servant of God. And Jesus said, when you fast, when you sacrifice, don't disfigure your face. Don't go around moping. Don't go around complaining. How many times have I heard people kind of casually mention in church, yeah, well, we got to do this, and it's so, and we're gonna get the youth, and we're gonna get them involved, and I was there all night, and we had to clean up, and nobody was helping, and interesting. But Jesus says, if you're gonna work for me, just put the oil on your head, smile on your face, and go do it. And don't worry about whether people appreciate what you're doing or not. I've always been torn with this as a pastor, because I do feel it's important to appreciate each other, and the Bible has a lot to say about encouraging one another. The Bible has a lot to say about, saying kind words to people, letting them know they're appreciated, they're valued, they're loved. But I have seen times in church where I wondered, are we just here to kind of pat each other on the back? Is it really necessary to elevate some people and to talk about them as if they're such a great Christian that only if the rest of us could be like them? And quite secretly, I think most of us kind of resent that kind of thing. If we see someone being honored to such a degree that we wonder, aren't they really just human like you and I? I'm pretty sure they're not that good all the time. And Jesus gets at this hypocrisy. At least that's his word for it. And I've shared with you before, but in case you weren't there, hypocrisy is the Greek word that means an actor. Someone who in the Greek plays, they would put a mask in front of their face, and then they would speak from behind the mask. And in the Greek theater, men would be the only actors. Women were not allowed, so men would play men parts and women parts, which must have been kind of comical. And they would just put a different mask. So they put a woman's mask, and then they would change their voice a little, and da-da-da-da-da. Then they put the man's mask, and they play a different role. And that's how the play would go about. And Jesus says, don't be like the hypocrites, the ones who hide behind the mask, who pretend to be one thing to everyone while they're watching, but then there's something else in secret. And it's that use of the word hypocrites that should clue us in as to what Jesus is driving at. The one thing that he's not saying, and I hope you caught this, the one thing he is not saying is no longer give to the needy. Stop praying. Stop fasting because you're doing it all wrong, and just quit it. Jesus is not saying that at all. He didn't say anything about quitting. In fact, quite the opposite. He said, I want to teach you how to do it right, in the right way, with the right attitude. And so this word hypocrites, it points us to something very fundamental about the teaching of Jesus, and very fundamental to Jesus' teaching actually empowering us, and dare I suggest, as all of his teachings do, it will actually set you free if you follow it. It's not a restriction. It's not a legalism. He's not trying to demand something. He's not saying, if you do it out in front of everybody, then you get your reward, and that's all I'm giving you because I told you not to do it that way. He's not like an angry parent that gets upset if we disobey him. He's just trying to teach us what will set us free and give us that quality of life that he came to give us. And so he says, the hypocrites, they're always worried about what the others out here will think. They are playing to the audience. That's what an actor does. An actor plays to the audience. In fact, you probably don't go into acting unless you like playing to the audience, unless you're hoping for some applause. And it can be even that way in church. It can be even that way in our personal lives, where we too all have something in our sinful nature where we want that applause, we want that attention, we want that popularity. And it's easy for us to make that our audience, to make the world our audience, to make the people around us our audience, to make the church our audience, and play to the audience. But who does Jesus say should be our audience? It's one person, and it's your Father. Your Father who loves you more than anything any word could describe, could ever be put into any kind of words. Your Father who gave his only begotten Son so that you would not perish, but you could live. He sacrificed of himself. This Father that you have, this perfect Father, he is the one who is to be your audience. And I've shared with you before, but the Quakers had this great phrase, and they said, live your life for the audience of one. For the audience of one. You know, when I was young, last week, if you were with us, I told a story of my frenemy Andy and how he bested me at football and what a traumatic experience that was for me. And you can start to see why I'm so messed up and have so many problems by the stories that I share with you. And another one that came from that exact same year in 7th grade, I remember I had just, in our little school, I had just moved up, and 7th grade in our school was the upper grades, because we had 7 through 10. We didn't have anything past 10th grade. And so 7 through 10 was like upper grades, and the others were kind of lower. And so once you got to 7th grade in that little school, we kind of felt big, and it was kind of like our high school almost. And I was really enjoying it, and I said, this is my year. I was coming into my own, and I was going to be popular. And of course, Andy was my competition for popularity, but I said, it's okay. I can be popular and cool and fun, and the girls will like me, and I'll do well in sports, and I'll do well in school. And I had it all kind of mapped out, and I was ready to go. And it's that age, right around 7th grade. You're hitting puberty, and you're becoming a teenager, and popularity is very important. And what your friends and what everybody around you thinks is very important to you at that age. And so I was trying really hard, and I'll remember one day in class, I was especially funny, at least in my own head. I was making little smart remarks here and there, and every once in a while that day, my teacher would say to me, and he was Mr. C. I'll give a shout out to Mr. C. He was a great teacher. He was kind of this big dude with this big bushy beard, and he would look at me and say, Rick, be quiet. Rick, enough. All right, sorry, Mr. C, because I was talking when I wasn't supposed to. I know, hard to believe. And so he warned me several times. And this one time in the afternoon, this is in the morning, I got several warnings, and I could tell he was starting to get a little upset. So I decided to tone it down, except he said something in class, and I had the perfect joke. And I made the joke in front of everybody, knowing it was going to kill. And it did. And the class started laughing, and Mr. Chamberlain stood up. He was sitting behind his desk. He stood up and he looked at me and he says, "Rick, you need a lot of attention, don't you?" Well, that was an interesting reaction. I looked around. I was like, well, and it's dead quiet, because Mr. C was upset. This was not spoken in a kind, asking, counseling kind of way. This was in, why do you need so much attention? And what's wrong with you, kid? And I've had it. And I'm up to here, and you put me over the edge, and now I'm done. And of course, without missing a beat, I had to make the most of it, and I just said, yes, I do. And everybody laughed again, so it was a well-played move on my part. But he was so upset, and I remember he stormed out of the classroom, and I thought, oh no, like, what's happening next? And I guess he just went out of the classroom just to regain his composure. And then he came back in, he didn't say anything, and we continued with our class. But I went home that day, and I started thinking about it, because I had never thought about that possibility that I needed a lot of attention. Did I need a lot of attention? Do I need more attention than most people? What did he mean by that? Do I talk more than most of the kids? What am I trying to do? Why do I do that? And it was actually really good for me. And you can see some many years later, I'm still thinking about that question, and I've never forgotten it. And I thought about it all throughout high school and college, and every once in a while it would come back to my mind. Did I need a lot of attention? And when I thought about it, I realized, yeah, I actually did need a lot of attention. Not only did I need a lot of attention, I wanted a lot of attention. Because I thought, if I had your attention, you liked me. Because at my young age, I thought the more attention I get, the more popular I am. And that was my goal. And so I had to be funnier than Andy. I had to be more smart remarks, more whatever. I had to do it to be popular. I had to do it to be valuable. I had to do it. Because then I'm popular, and then my life matters. So who was I living for? What was my audience? My audience was for my classmates. If they would laugh, if they would think I was funny, if they would think I was cool, then my life had meaning. But you can see how easily that can be a stressful way to live. And I really feel bad for the kids of today. Because when I was in 7th grade, there were no iPhones. There was no internet. I know, I'm really old. But there was no internet when I was in 7th grade. We didn't know what it was. It wasn't even in our minds at that point. And now I look at our young people, and they have so many pressures to try to be popular, and you have to get this many likes, and you have to do that, and you have all these different accounts and social media, and then you have to navigate real life with fake life and online life and school life. And Jesus' words are here to set us free. Because if you get caught up in that rat race, it will churn you up, it will spit you out. You will never find what you're looking for. If you live for the audience of them, you will never find what you're looking for. Because them might be fun one day, them might like you one day, but the next day they'll be the same ones who will be talking behind your back, trolling you on Instagram. They'll be the same ones who will be whispering this or laughing at someone else or liking somebody else better the next day. Because them is never consistent. Them goes up and down and around, and you can never count on them. Well, as I started to grow up, I did mature, and I don't think I needed quite as much attention in college as I did at high school, so that was good. And I started growing a little wiser in my youth and growing in my faith, and I decided in college that I was going to be a minister. And I said, you know what? I can serve God and use some of my talents for God that way. I always have enjoyed being up front where many people seem terrified. I always thought, I guess because I need attention, it was good to be up front. Why not? It's not that scary. We can do it. And so I figured that was a good use of my skills and my talents. And so I enrolled in Southern Adventist University in theology and began studying. And as I was taking preaching classes and things, I started to say, wow, I want to preach the best sermons. I want them to be fantastic. I want people to go, whoa. I want them to say, amen. I want them to stand on their feet. I want them to fall on their knees. Like, I just had this vision of, wow, I could really move people. And you can see what the devil was doing there. Even though my priorities may have shifted, even though my life may have changed, the same theme is emerging. If I can please them, if I can move them, if I can get them to think I'm a great preacher, then I will be somebody. Then I will have accomplished something. Then I will have value. And I remembered very early in my ministry going to my first church and getting all excited. And I was like, all right, I get to preach every week and I'm going to put together these awesome sermons. And I was really gung-ho about it, as many young people are. And I remember that first year noticing something. I remember specifically that first year preaching a sermon I'd really worked on, and I put all these fun parts into it, and I had some great stories. And I remember preaching my heart out and being funny and smooth and everything well, and I had my outline, and I nailed my conclusion, and getting done, and people walking by me as I shook hands at the door. And I remember just getting like very tepid response. I was waiting for the, wow, Pastor, that was a great sermon. Thank you for feeding us today, or something. And there was almost nothing. And I went home that day and I asked my wife at the time, I said, wasn't that one of my better sermons? And she's like, yeah. I said, what do you mean? She's like, it was okay. She said, I don't think I would call it one of your better ones. And I remember being so perplexed. Are you kidding me? That was definitely one of my better ones. I enjoyed that one. I was on fire for that one. What are you talking about? And I made note of that in my mind. I said, this is so odd. Where's the disconnect? I thought that was a great sermon. And then I remember that same year, preaching a sermon. And this is a true story. I remember in the middle of preaching my sermon, I thought, this is the worst sermon. Why am I am wasting these people's time. I did not prepare adequately. The point is not even that great. This is a dismal, I just need to wrap this up and sit down. This sermon is going nowhere. It's terrible. And so I kept reading the rest of whatever my passage was. I finished up the passage. I finished the sermon. And I felt in my head, I felt so dejected and just embarrassed. That was a disaster. I've got to do better next week. That's the only consolation I had. And I stood at the door again, expecting people to be, hey, nice, have a good week, Pastor. And one by one, as people shook my hand, they were like, Pastor, that really spoke to me. What? Yeah, one by one. Pastor, that was so powerful. Pastor, thank you so much. And I was like, I wanted to say, are you kidding me? Have you been coming to my church? Because that was clearly one of my worst. Are you just playing with me? Are you trying to encourage me because it was so bad that you didn't want me to give up and quit? So you're saying something nice? I don't understand. And I went home that day and I asked my wife, what'd you think of the sermon today? She's like, no, that was really good. That was really powerful. I said, what do you mean it was really powerful? I said, I literally got off the stage and thought that was a disaster. She's like, really? No, that was good. It was one of your better ones. So I talked to God about this. And here's what God said to me, at least the best I could make of what he was saying to me. He said, Rick, if the sermon's all about you, I'm not going to be able to bless it. I'm not going to be able to use my Holy Spirit to translate my word into what the people need to hear. If it's all about you, then the people will hear all about you. And that's all we can do. But Rick, if you'll humble yourself and just speak my word, I will give you the words. I will translate it through my Spirit into what the people need to hear. And the sermon will be from me, and they will be blessed. Whoa, that's a little different than I thought. So that's why I don't study for any of my sermons anymore. No, just kidding. Just kidding. But it's exactly why I know when I am weak, he is strong. When I let him do his thing, he can do it so much better than I ever could. Because he knows who's in the audience. He has a word for them. He has something to say. He has something to speak. And so I can do all the fasting and praying, but if I'm doing it so people will think, oh, there's a good pastor. Look what he's doing this week. Oh, so wonderful. His words and his prayers are so flowery and eloquent. Oh, wow, what a great pastor. If all that people are seeing in me is what a great pastor Rick Johns is, they will never get the blessing of meeting the source of their life, their love, their joy, their peace, and that's God. And so for any of us, the journey is, how do we let God work through us? How do we start to realize how exciting it is when God works through us and does things through us that we could never do on our own? You know, God has a word for that. Did you know that? This idea where he does something through us that's so much greater than anything we could have done, that word is grace. You see, we think grace is all about just God, forgiving us because we're sinners and he still has mercy on us. But grace is something much more in the Bible. It's this quality, it's this thing we receive from God that works through us and does something that we could not do ourselves. Something bigger, something better. Then I remember in my 30s, this is like my personal confession sermon, so enjoy it. It's not going to be every week. In my 30s, I'm on an airplane. I had just started my doctorate with the Denver Seminary, and I remember I was flying to Denver. And I'm going out there for classes, so I'm flying alone, I'm by myself, and I'm sitting next to a lady, and she makes small talk with me, and so I'm talking to her. She's probably a little older than I am, probably 10 years older, actually, or so. And I find out that she's an entrepreneur. And as I'm talking to her, I realize this woman is sharp. Like, she is intelligent. And I find out, as I ask more questions, she's very humble. She doesn't tell me much. But I find out she's done really well in life. She's talking about all these different companies that she started, got them off the ground, and then she sells them for like millions of dollars. And she's done it like many times. She's just like, oh, I just look around, see what the needs are in the business world, and I start a company for that need, and then I sell it, and I make money, and I go on to the next thing. It's like, oh, wow, that's not quite my life. That's an interesting way to live. Like, I can't even comprehend. You just see a need, and you start a whole business and sell it for millions. Like, what kind of life are you living? But she was so humble and kind of cool about it. And as we were talking, going back and forth, and I asked her some questions, of course, she's asking me questions, and she was fascinated that I was a pastor. And she's like, I think that's really cool. And she says, I just read Malcolm Gladwell's book, It, and, do you believe in it? And, I'm like, yeah, I guess I haven't read the book, but what does Malcolm say the it is? And she said, oh, it is just that it factor. You said it's something you can't describe, but when someone has it, they have it. And when they get it, they get it. And it's kind of intuition. It's something that's beyond knowing. And as a spiritual person, I was like, oh yeah, I definitely believe in it with the capital I. Like, there's definitely an it. There's something beyond our knowing, something beyond it. And we had this fascinating conversation. She really was intrigued by that concept. And she said to me, well, what made you become a pastor? And I said, it's a funny thing. I said, a lot of people in my family are pastors. But I said, that's not it. That's not it. I said, I chose to become a pastor. It wasn't because my dad was a pastor or my grandfather or my great-grandfather. I said, I chose it. It was just something, that... And I said, honestly, I don't think my dad, I give him credit. He didn't, push me into it. So I never felt like I had to do it. And she nodded and she smiled and she said, yeah. I said, wait, no. I said, seriously, he never put pressure on me. I chose it. She went, uh-huh. And I'm like, what? I said, okay, I think I get where you're going with this. And she said, no, if you say you chose it, that's great. And I said, no, I did choose it. And we were kind of laughing. And she said, listen, she says, all I mean is, she said, we don't realize how much we're influenced by our own family. And she said, look at your home. Being a pastor was something valuable. How could you not grow up in that and think, I should be a pastor. I want to be a pastor. And it was the first time that I had really given that thought because I was so proud. My story had always been, nobody kind of pushed it on me. I chose it. But then I thought, well, but I did want my dad to think I was a good guy. And my mom always valued pastors, and our whole family valued pastors. Well, there's something to that. Like being a pastor would be a way to get a lot of affirmation in my family. And guess what? When I enrolled in theology school, everybody was very happy. Grandma wrote me a letter, true story, saying, you're going to be the next Mark Finley. That was the high compliment. I was like, all right, Mark Finley, here I come. Ironically, got to work with him later in life, but Grandma said, you could be the next Mark Finley. Like that is her celebrity. That is like as high as you can get. So it was in me from a young child. And I realized, you know what? There is a part of me that's a pastor because it means a lot to my family. And it gives me a sense of worth and value because my family honors that. And my dad's proud of me, and my mom's proud of me, and my grandma's proud of me. But wait a minute. Did I do it because God is proud of me? Because God said, this is where I want you to be. That's another question. It's not one and the same question. And so when Jesus here says, if you're going to do something, do it for that audience of one, you better get that audience of one right. And so I want to ask you this morning, I want to ask you this week, I want to ask you whenever you're watching this sermon, maybe you're someone watching this sermon months after I preached it, I'm looking at you. What is your audience of one? Who do you live for? Who are you trying to please? Is it your parents? Is it your classmates? Is it your coworkers? Is it that impossible to please mother or that family that was always putting pressure on you to be a certain way? Is it American culture that tells you have to get money and work your way up and drive a certain car and wear certain clothes in order to be valuable and important? You didn't know there was so much in this, did you? You thought you were good because you don't use trumpets and you're fine praying in your closet and not being up front. Like, you thought you were good, but you're not good because Jesus is getting at the heart of our sinful nature. There's a reason that the first commandment is, you know what it is? Trivia time. First commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Why? Because I'm the only true God. All other false gods will let you down, will disappoint, will leave you hungry. Jesus isn't telling us to do this stuff in secret because there's some great moral value in doing it in secret. In fact, really, it's not even about doing things in secret. If you read it that way, you're reading it legalistically. Don't walk away from today's sermon and say, I got to do everything in secret, because that's what Jesus said. What Jesus said is, don't do things for the motive of being seen by men. Jesus was put on a cross. That wasn't very secret. Jesus was lifted up so that all men could see him. Why? Because his motive was right. His heart was right. Because with Jesus, it always comes back to the heart. We're going to close our service in just a minute, but I want to challenge you. Who is your audience of one? That is your question. Ask yourself. Spend some time, journal on it. This week, I want you to answer that question. If there's another one other than the one, I want you to find it. I want you to discover it. I want you to realize how much we tend to live our lives in front of other audiences. And then I want you to think, how is that working out for you? Does it bring you joy? Does it give you peace? Do you feel the love because you do that? Or is there a better way? I want to challenge you, the best way, the only real way, is to live your life before the audience of one, capital O-N-E. The one, the only one. And he is so proud of you already. So you don't have to do it to please him. You don't have to do it to earn his favor. You do it because he loves you so much you want to share that love. You want to give to others. You want to talk to him because he's the only one that truly understands. He's the one that knows you. He's the father you never had. He's the one who loves you unconditionally. And if you're going to fast and pray for something, if the Lord puts on your heart, I really need to bring this matter and just cry out to heaven, I'm not going to do it so that other people think I'm holy. I'm doing it because my Father's good, and if I come before him, he will hear my prayer, and he will answer in ways I could have never imagined. So I challenge you this week. Who is your audience? Who's the one you've been living for? Now it's time to shift, to drop the false audience, to drop the false applause, to drop the fake ones, and come before the true one. And let your life have meaning and value, and find the joy in joy itself. Will you join me in making that commitment for this week? Take Jesus' words seriously. And then join us next week as we talk about the perfect prayer and how we can deepen that connection with our Father.